All right, so the FX6 really is the next logical step, and they really have taken, I think, what this sensor is really capable of doing with the proper production camera. And so that's how I'll describe the FX6. So the FX3 is perfect for YouTubers and filmmakers that need that small form factor camera. But when you get into that next level of filmmaking, it's really hard to beat the FX6, and it is a fantastic documentary camera.
Oh yeah.
So it's small, lightweight, and it's still small enough to where, especially if you're doing documentary filmmaking where you're trying to keep kind of a low profile or a low footprint, you can still get away with the FX6 because it's still within that size of camera that no one's really going to bother you. And I have taken the FX3 in situations where I just want to be able to shoot wherever, and that's what makes these cameras so perfect. But unlike their larger counterparts, if you are a running gun filmmaker or guerrilla filmmaking, it's hard to beat this size form factor camera.
Yeah, definitely.
So. But yes, the Sony Color Science is phenomenal. There are, I'll give you a little pro tip here. Sony came up with 2 color gamuts. There's one called Sony Gamut 3, Sony slog3.gamut3.cine. And for most people, I would say this is a great gamut to use, especially if your final output's going to be like YouTube or general broadcast or documentary, or you're going to be having a lot of footage and you're not really going to have time to color grade. That's the way to go because your footage is going to look great. S-Cinetone exists in both of these cameras, and that was sort of a look that came out of the Venice family. So that's available on these cameras, and that's really useful. Again, if you're in a very tight deadline where you got to get this footage out, but you need something that looks good. So I've shot that way for a few clients that just were in a hurry or didn't have the time to get through a proper color grade, and so they're just like, we just need to get this out the door. We just want to edit it, and so S-Cinetone, fantastic. Also really good for live situations.
Oh yeah, definitely.
If you're gonna spend the time to do color grade, and if you're gonna be doing HDR, Sony offers the slog3 .gamut 3, which is a really, really cool color space.
Yes,
it is a huge gamut. And I've been using that one a lot. It's what we've been shooting most of our stuff on. I really like it. Some colorists aren't used to that workflow because they think it doesn't have all the colors that the .cine does, but you really don't need them. And again, if you're going to be going into the HDR workflow, that's the way to do it. Wonderful color gamut, and so again, that's usually my go-to. I really like shooting that. There's a video that I got coming out that's going to be talking about the difference between log and raw, and in its most basic form, I will say that log is the best way to get the most dynamic range out of a camera. You're really not going to get any additional dynamic range out of a 16-bit file, which is admittedly, Arri cameras, Blackmagic, and Red cameras are all 12-bit cameras. So Sony's really the only one. They're probably not the only one, but they're the only one that I know of off the top of my head that's shooting 16-bit. But you're not necessarily going to get more dynamic range. Technically, you probably could, but as long as you shoot log, you will achieve the as close to the manufacturer's exposure latitude.
As they say.
Right, and it's got a ton of latitude.
Okay.
I've brought things back from plus or minus 4 stops, completely. Of course, they advertise, I forget what it is, like 12 or 14 stops, something like that.
For which one?
For both these cameras.
Oh, okay.
I can't remember off the top of my head. Somebody in the comments might be able to remind me, but What that usually means is that within your frame, it's not necessarily that you can fully recover something at those extremes, but that you still have information in that area. Mm-hmm. So it'll still show up. And so that's generally what they're referring to. But as far as full recovery, I've been able to do about plus or minus 4 stops. No. Which is a lot.
Oh, yeah. It's definitely a lot.
Yeah. So let's see. I'll talk just very briefly about the Sony color sign. So what happened prior to this was Sony's cameras basically came out of the broadcast world. Mm-hmm. So they were known as the documentary camera or the broadcast camera, and admittedly some documentaries were shot on Super 16. But that was their niche, and because of that, their color science was very exact. So if you put up a color chart onto a Sony camera, it would hit those colors spot on. The problem is that filmmakers didn't exactly want perfectly accurate colors.
Yeah, because we're creatives. We
right,
like the
right.
ebb and flow, and yeah.
Mm-hmm. So when the Venice came out, they rethought their color science, and that's what ultimately ended up being S-Cinetone, of course. But with the Sony Venice, they came out with a new color science that changed the way skin tones and sort of prioritized colors differently. And it was a runaway hit because obviously,
Yeah, the Venice is very big.
Yeah,
They've
exactly.
got the Venice 2 out. Yeah,
the Venice 2 is a phenomenal camera.
Oh, yeah.
And, of course, the new upcoming Sony Burano.
Oh, yes.
Which is a fantastic camera, and I'm happy to see that that camera exists because it's right between the Venice 2 and the FX9. For those that are wondering, the FX9, as opposed to the FX6 that we have here, is really a camera that was, in my opinion, it's one of the best indie film cameras. So you can shoot Lifetime movies with it. You can shoot probably productions up to, I would say, maybe about $5 to $6 million. It works really good in those environments. So if you have a budget that goes from, let's say, as low as $60,000 and as high as $5 million, it works great in that range because it gives you all the capabilities of a more expensive production camera like the Venice or Arri Alexa 35 or whatever. But obviously those cameras are on a different scale as far as, but you do get full frame 6K, and yes, it records to 4K. But again, in those productions that you're working on, you're probably going to be wanting the smaller log 4K files, especially if you're doing Lifetime movies. Those they don't like big files.
Oh yeah.
So even filmmakers that come in with their red cameras are like, oh god, you can see the producer sweating it out because they don't want to deal with raw footage. They don't want to deal with the large files.
They want something as ready to go as possible out of the camera. Yeah.
So the XAVC codecs that both the FX3 and the FX6 and the FX9 have are wonderful codecs. They are H.264 variants, but they're modified by Sony to give you really, really nice quality. And myself and just about every other production out there has been really happy with it. So, no complaints with that. Now, the raw recording. I know this is kind of the elephant in the room. Both of these cameras can record to up to 16-bit RAW, depending on the recorder, and that's sort of the caveat with these. A long time ago, when Red came out with their wonderful camera, they patented somehow the ability to do internal RAW recording, and that kind of screwed up all the other manufacturers. Yep. So everyone had kind of their little gimmicks to get around it. Arri, of course, had kind of like a DPX kind of frame-by-frame thing, so it technically didn't infringe on Red's patent. Blackmagic processed part of their raw image, so it's not fully raw. They all kind of had their little gimmicks.
I don't know how you could patent a recording format like that.
Yeah, and it was in particular the sticking point was that it was internal. So the Sony Venice had an add-on. So that way they could record what looked like internal, but it was an add-on. Like I said, all the manufacturers found like clever ways to get around that really annoying patent. But And that's where these cameras come in. So for those that were wondering why these cameras don't offer internal RAW, blame Red.
Yeah. For any camera.
For any camera.
That doesn't do internal RAW.
Right. Earlier this year, Nikon did challenge Red finally. Mm-hmm. And Red didn't want to lose that patent war, so they made a deal with Nikon. But it does kind of open the door for other manufacturers to allow internal RAW recording. So I'm looking. Okay. That is how the Sony Burano kind of got around that.
Gotcha.
Of course, it is a $20,000 camera. So.
Yeah. Okay, with that little bit of history out of the way, we have the FX3 and FX6 here, and we have a couple of accessories.
That's right.
That we're going to talk about as well. And you've already went over a few that you have on your FX3, the Rode Wireless Go-To, which is an amazing wireless audio solution for any size production or budget, from the smallest of the small to the biggest of the big. I mean,
yeah, Rode has really hit upon a market that didn't have some of the tools that YouTubers and short filmmakers and low budget indie films kind of needed. It's been a great system for that. This setup, like I said, is already, I'm recording 3 mics on one mirrorless camera with the only accessory being that small rig half cage.
Yep.
I can't emphasize enough half cage.
Yep.
You don't need a full cage.
Exactly.
Actually, I'll show another little trick that this half cage does in a second. But other accessories, of course, are stuff like the PL mount. I would highly recommend. I'm not sponsored by any of these companies, by the way. The Vocus mount that I have, very good. There's another one, Hot Rod Camera, makes a really, really good E-mount to PL mount, and that one lives on my FX9.
Gotcha.
Probably my favorite mount.
Yeah.
It is.
You said E to PL?
That's right, E to PL.
Right.
Now, the best out of the E to PL mount is made by Croziel. It is going to be expensive, but it does what no other PL to E mount does, and it records. It passes through the lens metadata.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's good.
So if you're going to be doing any VFX work,
yeah,
you need that mount.
Oh yeah.
Your VFX people will love you.
And that's the only mount that does it. The only E to PL.
Currently, that's the only one that does it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
Croziel also makes another really neat mount for servo-driven lenses. So if you're using something like the Ingenue Easy Zooms, for example, they come with servos, or the Fujinon lenses also come with servos.
Okay.
It has a connector for it, so let's take the FX3 or the FX6. They have zoom rockers on them. You can control these big cinema zoom lenses with their built-in servos from the camera.
Nice.
And you can even put them on autofocus.
Oh, yeah.
So imagine these giant cinema cameras without the addition to any of these DJI or LiDAR or whatever. It's literally, it's the mount talking to the camera.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So
and the lens, the motors are all in the lens and all that.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, I mean, they are technically external, but they have that.
But they're still,
right?
Exactly. That grip that's over it. Yeah.
Yeah. Those are. I'm a big supporter of Croziel. They're a small company out of Germany, and I have their wireless focus system, and
I can test. I've used it a few times. It's pretty good,
and it still works. I've had that thing forever.
Yeah.
It's because they're a small company. Their customer service is extraordinary. So one day, one of my motors was acting up. It was like glitching and doing something weird. I took some cell phone footage of what it was doing, wrote an email to Croziel. Overnight, they wrote a new firmware patch for me. I'm not Sir Roger Deakins or anything. I'm just Marco. And that's how good their customer service was. So that says a lot about that company. So I know their products are a little expensive, but it is worth it.
Oh yeah, definitely. And along with the FX6, you have the small rig half cage for your FX3. Small rig makes cages for the FX6 as well. I haven't gotten a cage for that just yet because my main use for that camera is putting it on a center lifter drone, which means I need to strip away as much unnecessary weight as possible. And a cage on a drone is very unnecessary. So yeah.
Again, I think Anthony and I are kind of on the same page. That you don't need to make these things very large.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. But I will probably be adding an accessory that Marco already has. I'll probably be getting the upgrade of that version. But Marco, you want to pull up your gimbal?
Oh yeah.
And show them what you're rocking.
So this is DJI's. Excuse me. This is DJI's RS2 gimbal. I really like it, and what I'll say about gimbals is that, there's always the latest and greatest. I would actually say to save yourself some money, instead of buying whatever the new one is, buy last year's model.
Yeah,
you'll save some money, and they're all quite capable. Exactly. I got this at a Black Friday deal.
Exactly. Or like I said, we talked about this in an earlier episode. Do your research and figure out what payload you need your gimbal to carry, all the accessories you want to add with it, and then decide what gimbal you want. Just don't always just get the latest and greatest, because it could be way overkill for what you need, or it could still be missing features that you need. So you just want to make sure you want to do your research and then get the gimbal that best fits your needs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
So yeah, read the technical sheets and make sure it's going to work with the workflow that you have. So whether you're going to be using an FX6 with a larger zoom lens like what we have here, or whether you're going to be flying an FX3 with a small prime lens like what I have over there. One of the reasons I got this half cage, and I just realized I forgot to bring over the little caddy, but just bear with me. If we look at the bottom of this, if you want to show them the bottom. This is a Arca Swiss dovetail.
Yeah, so this part right here.
Right. Yeah. So that means that I don't need a tripod plate on there. It just goes directly either to my tripod or to my gimbal, the RS2 that I just showed you, or the RS3. They all have the same adapter.
Nice.
Again, keeping things simple without having to.
Yeah, because I know there's always fussing. Like if you pull up the FX6 here, you want to pull up and show the bottom.
Oh yeah.
There's 1/4-20s for the plate that you have. So with this, you don't have to fuss with all that because it's already built in. You don't have to twist off and try to change this plate for this tripod or that plate for that tripod like you would do with that. It's already built into the cage, which is nice.
Another thing that this cage has is that there is a little 15 millimeter rod connector, and it also has a smaller, I forget what it is, whatever DJI's proprietary rod is.
I think it's a 12.
Something like that. So it does have the little...
The 15 mil and then the 12 mil
adapter, right? The insert, thank you.
Yeah, right there.
So if you're using any of those accessories again, this is a half cage.
Yeah, this thing is super light too. Like I'm amazed with both of these. Even with all this on it, what looks like, it's still light. It is still super, super light.
And if you turn the camera on the bottom again, you see that little silver ring over there? Go ahead and pull it out. There.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
Built-in, built-in tool.
Yes,
that is amazing.
So whenever you forget your flathead screwdriver, you have one right there,
and it just slides right in there. Like
that thing has come in handy a few times. So I'm just
saying, small rig does some things. Small rig they are a good company to see about when it comes to camera accessories, camera cages. All that. Do they do? Well, I know they do camera cages for pretty much any camera out there, but do they do other things, camera-wise, like other accessories, follow focuses?
That's a good question.
Any kind of other stuff.
I haven't really looked into them too much. Unfortunately, my other cameras use the Airy accessories because those are those rent out a lot, even with productions that I'm not on. Most productions expect the Arri cages.
Gotcha.
But Arri doesn't make stuff for the FX3. I don't know about the FX6, but I don't think they do. Small rig, I haven't been disappointed with them. They've made some pretty decent stuff.
Exactly.
So yeah, that's about all I can say about Sony is that they've really upped their game in the past. I would say maybe 7 to 8 years ago. It was a real game changer for them because they started out as the original digital cinema camera in 1999.
Nice.
And Red kind of took over, and then eventually Arri became the standard, and so Sony had to do something, and I think they did a good job. And this lineup has brought that quality filmmaking, and like we saw with the Creator, yes, it's totally possible to shoot a major motion picture with it if you wanted to. With that.
Right here.
Mm-hmm.
It's right here.
Yeah. That's all you need. Yeah, so really, we're at the point where you don't have much of an excuse to say you can't do it.
Exactly. And before we go, let's go over price points of the cameras.
Oh, that's right. Let's go
if you weren't lucky enough to grab one and you're thinking about getting one, price point starting.
We're looking at about, I would say, roughly about $4,000, give or take, maybe 100 or so here. Mm-hmm. There are some that seem to be appearing on the used market because these are really well-made cameras. Mm-hmm. Feel free to buy a used camera.
Exactly.
You may not, depending on what your use case is, there may not be any reason to buy a new one. And because they're still such good high-quality cameras, why not?
Exactly. Yes. And price point starting with the FX6 was about, when I kitted it all out, which I basically got a couple extra batteries, some media, card readers and all that, it came out to about $8,000. Mm-hmm. But I believe the camera body alone is about, $6,000? Yeah, five to 6,000 now. Yeah. And then, of course, you got to add a lens and all that stuff. But, yeah, still, in the terms of, in the world of filmmaking, these are super, super inexpensive. I'm not going to say cheap because they're not cheap. They're very, very inexpensive cameras compared to what we were talking about earlier, with the $250,000 cameras.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of a fluke. I think the most expensive camera you can get right now is maybe... I think you'd end up spending about $120,000. Yeah. So not quite $250,000, but even my FX9, I think kitted out with the Arri accessories cost me a little over $12,000. Now, of course, the lenses that I shoot with it cost more than the camera because those lenses are like $40,000. But
exactly.
And then if you get into the Venice, you're looking at spending between $72,000 and $80,000, which is roughly the price that you'd spend on an Arri Mini. And honestly, if you're trying to decide between a Mini LF or a Mini and a Venice, just get the Venice. I know that the Mini. Now, the one thing I will say about Arri is that they, especially for rental houses, because of the way Arri handles their cameras, and this was something else that Sony has learned, and that is that. They can't come out with a new camera the same way Red did. A lot of rental houses have stopped carrying Red because there's always that new camera and they just don't rent very well. So if you are looking for a camera that is rentable, Arri and Sony are the top renters right now if you plan to rent out your camera. That's not to say that Red or Panasonic or any of these other manufacturers have inferior cameras, because they don't. They have excellent cameras. It's just a question of whether or not you're going to be able to make your money back on them. Yeah. The FX6 is a highly rentable camera. The FX3 is really more of a share grade camera, but you can easily make your money back on that as well. The FX9 is a workhorse camera, so that'll definitely make its money back because it's, I think, I forget what the body costs. It's somewhere between $9,000 and $10,000.
It's $9,000 and $10,000, I believe. Yeah,
it'll definitely make its money back. Even with the upcoming Sony Burano, it's definitely going to make its money back because it's still like producers know that camera. Yeah, it's been really reliable. And all these cameras are weather sealed as well. So you can take them into difficult shooting environments.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I think that about wraps it up for our Sony side of
Our
this.
Sony roundup, yeah.
Our Sony roundup. FX3, FX6. Marco also has you still have your Venice, right?
I still have the Venice,
yeah. So his FX9 and his Venice.
And we'll talk about that on a later episode. But
Exactly. Well, again, happy holidays. I hope you're enjoying. If you got time off or if you're working, just enjoy the time.
Here's to y'all.